Overall, Riot is great at designing champions. They make unique champs with kits that allow you to fulfill your fantasies. Jinx gets Murderlust and goes on a rampage to kill everyone. Katarina gets Murderlust and goes on a rampage to kill everyone. And Warwick goes on a rampage, but just to kill one person. Jokes aside, the champs Riot design are very well crafted, and they try very hard to fill niche areas to help players who haven't really found their playstyle yet. Kindred is a standout example of this. Back in October 2015, before the Marksman rework, there was a unique ranged AD carry who could jungle. Riot designed Kindred to be able to kite camps and make their W reward that, the large area for Lamb to jump around in, and a heal that stacks by moving. They were strong on release granted, but to release a new champ and have a win rate between 45 and 55% means the design team did a good job, and number tweaks can always occur in the coming months. Aurelion Sol was designed as a roaming mid laner who wasn't locked out from roaming pre-6 thanks to Comet of Legend. He even predates Talon's parkour, meaning he filled a niche which interested players like me. Roaming mids is a subject I care a lot about though, so I'll talk about that in another video. Now, you might be wondering what this video is about supports, and so far I've only talked about jungle and mid lane. It's because I'm confused why Riot can so successfully design a jungle AD carry and a roaming mid laner who spends most of his time outside of lane, but can't design a flexible support. Now, namely Pyke, Tahm Kench, and Senna. Firstly, I want to clarify what I mean by flexible. A flexible champ is one who can play multiple roles successfully. You'll hear the term flex pick in most competitive league matches when they talk about draft, as it opens up opportunities for counter picks. Most of the time this is with top jungle and top mid because they share similar qualities champion wise. Think Jarvan in Worlds being a solid jungler but also used as a counter pick to Kennen in the top lane. Pyke, Tahm Kench, and Senna are all champions who have been designed to have potential to be played in mainly support and also another role, be that mid, top, or AD carry. Now, I can hear the comments shouting at me saying that mages such as Lux, Brand, and Morgana are all flex supports. Well, those champs are all designed for mid lane originally. The same with Seraphine. The only enchanters who I can think who broke out from support are Senna, who abused an item that granted gold every time she queued, and Lulu, who, very successful, only builds support items in solo lane anyway. Neither of those are shining examples of balance, and speaking of, let's talk about a pick that terrorized the unofficial balance team of Reddit for months: Pyke. Pyke was released in May 2018 and burst onto the scene with great success and commendation due to his unique support assassin playstyle, music, and art. Initially he was played as a tank due to his inflated tank and damage numbers, but once changes came through to those, players started picking up lethality as the intended build. Players immediately noticed that Pyke could be a successful mid laner, and with that came off-meta domination. In mid lane, he had a solid 53% win rate, and through the years, mid lane Pyke had a minimum 2% higher win rate than support Pyke. The strength of the solo lane pick became apparent to the player base during Worlds 2019, when Wonder and Caps, both of G2 Esports, pulled out solo lane Pyke and picked up wins with him. Riot had not thought about the true strengths of the champion. Everything support Pyke could do, solo lane Pyke could do better. Riot had oversighted the power of his sustain and roaming, Pyke's true strengths. Back then he didn't need to hit Q, he didn't need to hit E. All he had to do was survive in lane and with his passive long enough for another lane to make a play, and then whoosh, get down there and make some cash. It was unhealthy, fun as hell for the Pyke player, but unhealthy nonetheless. Throughout seasons 10 and 11, solo lane Pyke has received an avalanche of nerfs to bottleneck him into the support role. E can no longer damage minions, Q doesn't do AoE damage, and the most brutal, his passive made to require 2+ enemies near him. Riot killed solo lane Pyke. The only people who play him now tend to be one-tricked, who'd rather stop playing than trust an AD carry to lane with them properly. Pyke is a failed flex pick, whose kit has been systematically changed to do one role only. Senna is a tricky one to talk about ever since she got out of that lantern. Senna was released as the first support marksman. The jury's still out on if Comet Ash really counts or not. Her passive is the linchpin to the flexibility. When she's farming, she gets a good income, so fewer souls drop. And when she's not CSing, there's a higher drop rate of the ghosty boys. Support Senna would pick up more souls and be a secondary form of damage. That was until Cloud9 came along. In the 2020 spring split, Cloud9 were up against Immortals, and bot laners Sven and Vulcan picked up a Senna Tahm Kench combo. A pretty standard draft led into one of the most interesting innovations in pro play in recent years. The Senna wasn't farming, but she wasn't supporting either. Sure, she had Spectral Sickle, so she would be placing wards, but her build was full damage. It became clear that Sven and the rest of the C9 squad had run the numbers. If Senna was allowed to stack her souls and not die in lane thanks to the peel of her lane partner, she could hit insane levels of damage in the later portions of the game. Finishing the game with an 8-0-2 scoreline, Sven had unleashed the playstyle later coined Fasting Senna onto the player base. This playstyle is why I don't believe Senna is a good flex support, because I believe Senna is an AD carry, and the only thing stopping that is the natural lack of communication in solo queue and the average medium to low skill level of the player base. It's a bold statement, but I'll explain myself. Senna is categorically stronger when fasting, otherwise pro players wouldn't have done it for so long without changing up the formula. There is an argument that the pro meta is very different to solo queue, and certain champs and playstyles don't work, hence why we don't see Warwick top with Barrier dominating the LCK. But without Riot introducing voice comms so you can communicate with your support, Fasting Senna will never be picked more than support Senna. Now for the skill level. ADC Senna has a higher play rate and win rate in higher elos. Lower elo players tend to pick support Senna over AD carry because worse players tend to gravitate to roles that are less demanding and champions with higher range and more safety. It's a trend with champions like Xerath and Lux have, and I think Senna suffers from it too. And I believe in half the support Senna players each played 10 games of her as an AD carry, her win rate would increase. Riot once again mixed the mark on a flex support by designing an AD carry who is flexed support instead. And finally, we have the reason I decided to do this video in the first place. Tahm Kench. The catfish has been a thorn in the side of esports enjoyers since Season 5 Worlds. Tahm, for most of his life, has been a high skill support pick. Yes, Tahm was a highly skilled champion back in the day, commonly found with a win rate about 45% solo queue. Tahm was hated by pro players thanks to his Devour ability. Riot continuously nerfed it until they threw in the towel and decided to give him a mini rework. The highlights of these changes are that his W and R were swapped, with a much reduced range on W, but does now knock up enemies on arrival. R does a lot more damage to enemies and shields allies, and Q now heals on champion hit. Now, Tahm was a fun off-meta top laner before the rework, whose weaknesses was the time it took him to get his 3 passive stacks, and getting poked down by ranged champions. After this rework, the demon was unleashed, and his new home was in the top lane. He went from being an off-meta top laner to being first pick top lane inside a solo queue. He was a sustain monster. The new Q heal paired with his E meant he chose when he left lane. I loved this form of Kench. Riot finally gave him agency. No longer was he just a W machine picked up as a Morgana or Thresh counter. Yes, he was strong, but is that a bad thing? Top lane in Season 11 was dominated by bruisers and fighters, all sustaining and dishing out true damage. Tahm was the only commonly picked tank that won lane and wasn't reliant on basic abilities that were point and click. And this whole time, support Tahm was meh. His W is a very slow ability and cancelled by CC, which there tends to be more of in a duo lane. His R shield, while nice, is overkill, and normally the shield wears off before it's fully utilised. Tahm was allowed to keep his top lane identity for 1 year, until the most recent patch, patch 12.2. Tahm's best sustainability, his E, was nerfed so that to get to the majority of the grey health, you are required to be near 2 enemies. Sound familiar? They gave him the Pyke treatment. As I write the script, Tahm's top win rate has fallen 5%. He is no longer viable in top and is likely weaker in a solo lane now than he was pre-rework. Time will tell whether support Tahm Kench will be playable. However, I'm getting very annoyed at this trend. Riot introduces a support whose kits favour a different role, and in reply, Riot kills that playstyle. Time will tell how ADC Senna changes and whether more players pick her up in that role. But if we can learn anything from this video, is that if it's much better than support Senna, Riot will gut it. Hey everyone, I hope you liked the video. This was my first kind of on-camera type of video I've ever done, so I hope you enjoyed it. The new episode of You Suck It League is hopefully coming out next week, so keep an eye out for that. And if you want to see more of me, then hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you for my next rant when I talk about the disappearance of roaming mid laners. Goodbye.